This week on Twiat, we tell you who you should trust when you're looking at new gear, and the cloud is falling. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
Bandwidth for the following show is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiat. This Week in Enterprise Tech, Episode 18, recorded November 12, 2012. The Cloud is Falling. This episode of Twiat is brought to you by RingCentral. We do everything in the cloud. That's why I love my cloud-based phone system by RingCentral. Zero startup costs and RingCentral is $20 per month per user. Try it now with a 30-day risk-free trial and buy one desk phone and get a second phone free, up to 20 phones. Call 800-543-9980 or visit ringcentral.com and use our promo code TWIT. And by Lantronix, maker of the X-Print server. Print from your iPad, iPhone, or any iOS device to virtually any printer. For more information, visit xprinter.com/twit and enter the coupon code TWIT to receive free shipping on your order. And by Social Media Solutions from SAP. If you're a social media manager at a large enterprise, gain insight and engage in social media in a systematic way with Social Media Solutions from SAP. Learn more at sap.com/twit. Welcome to Twiat, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Balacer, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. And as always, I am joined by an all-star, all-geek, stellar cast, starting with Mr. Brian Chi. Now, Brian comes to us from Hawaii. Wait, no, that's not Hawaii. Brian, where are you?
About 5 feet from you.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, Brian's in Washington, D.C. right now. He is the evangelist for Thin Links, which is great because we're going to be talking about one of those thin client stories today. But Brian, what's going on? Why are you in D.C.?
I'm burnt out. I need some time off. And, oh, by the way, on a more serious point, I'm actually also paying a little bit of homage to my boss who did not make it out of 9/11, the Pentagon on 9/11. So I promised myself to go and put something on her memorial.
Yeah, we'll be stopping by the Pentagon Memorial later on today. If you were ever in D.C., you really do need to stop by and well, just honor the men and women who have served our country. Now, speaking of serving our country in a different way, we have brought back Mr. Curtis Franklin from Enterprise Efficiency. Curtis, coming to us from Florida, how are things down there?
Things are wonderful in Florida. We're having a stellar celebrated Veterans Day, as we had a very nice actual Veterans Day yesterday. Grateful to all who have served and to the concept of serving others. It's something that we should honor more in the country and in our industry.
And as always, it's great to have you back. Now, I want to spread out the Twiat love as much as possible. Last time we had a legal story, we brought in William Shapiro to talk about a decision down in South Carolina. I wanted to bring someone else today, and the story is a little bit different because it's not necessarily about a law, it's about a criminal case. And so I went through my Rolodex, and I pulled up the number one choice I had for criminal law, and that was Dan Balacer. By the way, pay no attention to the last name. We're not related in any way. Dan, how are you today?
Good, Padre. Good. Just thank you. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, this is totally awesome. I feel like the fan at the courtside at a game, and Dan Tony is saying, "Hey, spell Steve Nash for a few minutes here." So this is an honor. Thank you.
Speaking of games, you root for those Arizona teams, right? So yeah. I mean, that's never good. No, we won't go there.
Thanks for bringing that up. Thank you.
Okay, now let's get right into it because we've got a full docket of just really good tech stories, enterprise-based stories. The first one is a product release. We don't normally talk about product releases on Twiat, but I think this is unique. Acer just announced their new C7 series of Chromebooks. What makes it interesting is that, it's at a new price point. It's $200. This is where we were hoping Chromebooks would have started. Now, for $200, you get a lot of machine. It looks like it's based off of Acer's 1830T chassis, which is the same notebook that I use, that Snubs uses, that Hack5 Darren uses. It's about 3 pounds. This one's based on an Intel Celeron 1.1 gigahertz 847 processor. It's got 2 gigabytes of DDR3 memory. It's got a 320 gigabyte hard drive, an 11.6-inch 720p screen, Ethernet and 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi, VGA and HDMI out, an integrated webcam, microphone, SD card reader, 3 USB 2.0 ports, and it comes with 100 gigabytes of Google Drive for 2 years, plus 12 free passes for GoGo in-flight internet. And of course, like most Chromebooks, it boots really quickly. This is about 18 seconds. So we see in this product that Acer and Google are really pushing into the business world, the enterprise world. That's why it's got the 100 gigabytes of Google Drive. That's especially why it has the 12 free passes for GoGo in-flight internet. It's something that you can pull out on the plane. It's just the right size for an airplane tray, and you go. Cheeber, what do you think about this? I mean, are we going to see a lot of really low price point Chromebooks coming out in the near future?
Oh man, I certainly hope so. There's a lot of cases where you just need an extra, machine for browsing, an extra machine to do casual things. And having something that inexpensive means, you can have a few of them around. Not the least of which is, those are great for trade shows. Those are great for classes. Chromebooks have a great potential. I've got one of those one PC per kid laptops, the original green one, and I'm going to try and see if I can wedge Chromebook on that.
Good. Curtis, when we start looking at penetrating the enterprise, I mean, because that's really where Google wanted these to go. You've got a system that is very easy to maintain because pretty much nothing is contained on the Chromebook. Everything's contained on a cloud storage device or a cloud service device. What needs to happen? Was it just price point that was missing, or is there something that Google is still missing in trying to get these into the enterprise?
No, I think that the big thing Google is waiting for now is simple enterprise hardware refresh cycles. The fact is that no matter how good it is, companies tend to be on a 4 or 5, or sometimes today even 6-year refresh cycles on their client devices. And so a lot of companies are going to wait until they hit refresh time before they look seriously at one of these thin clients. Now, the place where we will see these coming into enterprises faster is through the BYOD, Bring Your Own Device program. And that's why I think, just like Apple did with the iPad, Google is going to see some enterprise success just through people bringing in their own Chromebooks. For that to work, the big thing they've got to have is some sort of VDI interface. You've got to be able to run a virtual desktop on that device. Once you can do that, life gets a lot easier from the enterprise perspective.
I want to bring this over to Dan, because Dan, you represent more of the consumer side of this kind of a product. I mean, it's not just for enterprise, but a good point to take from Curtis is this BYOD phenomenon. Whereas we were used to 10 years ago, products making it to the enterprise first and then filtering out into the consumer market, we're now seeing that reversed. You've got things like iPads and iPhones and Android tablets and phones coming into the enterprise from the consumer realm. Do you see consumers getting interested in something like this, a $200 device that is really easy to maintain, that is relatively competent, that has a decent battery size, a battery life, that is a small size, small weight, and that is basically disposable? Is that something that it just doesn't hit something in the consumer level, doesn't find any interest, or do you see it becoming usable?
Well, the $200 price point obviously is very tough to beat. I mean, especially for a computer which allegedly has a lot of the functionality of a regular laptop. I'm just a little skeptical as to why one would buy this particular device over, and I'm not saying this is an Apple fanboy, but over an iPad, over an Android tablet, or even under some kind of a Windows PC, a laptop, which you can get for like $400, $300 anyways. I bought 2 laptops, PC laptops for my law office, and I think we spent $299 each. Toshiba 15-inch laptops. I mean, I just don't. and they're full featured. You know, you don't need to have internet access in order to use them. So I mean, you know, I guess it's cool, but I don't really see as a consumer why we would need that.
Cheever, let me toss that to you, because that's actually a really good point. The first series of Chromebooks, they were much hyped. People thought they would be a great thing, especially for people who are managing enterprise networks. But they came out at $400 to $500, and people could not justify buying something for $400 to $500, something that cost as much as a full laptop that, did not deliver the kind of functionality that we would expect from that. What do you think about that? I mean, is it possible to look past that and actually see the functionality within a Chromebook, or is that something that's it's destined to fail?
You know, I don't know. There's a lot of things that need to change and a lot of things I need to play with. I actually have never even played with a Chromebook yet, so I'm looking forward to it. But I tell you, there's an awful lot of things. No matter how much HTML5 is supposed to be taking over, there's still an awful lot of Flash out there. And especially when you start getting into network management, a lot of these SNMP management tools, a lot of the widgets and graphs are all Flash-based because it's darn easy to put in there. So not having that on the iPad has been a great frustration with me. And that was actually one of the reasons why I love my Microsoft Surface. I've got Flash again. Now, I know it's going to go away someday, but at least I have it for the interim. And, you know, I'm hoping the Chromebook has that capability built in. And, you know, it's nice having a full keyboard.
Let me throw to you, Curtis, because you brought up a really good point about VDI. A VDI would be a really big point, a big seller for enterprise wanting to bring the Chromebook into their network fold. But do you think Google will want that? I mean, Google doesn't want to support someone else's VDI. Google wants you to buy into their infrastructure. They want you to use Google Docs and Google Drive, Google Mail. Do you think that can coexist alongside a VDI, or is this one of these things where Google's going to say, look, it is what it is. You can hack it to use VDI, but we're not going to enable any native support for someone else's solution?
Well, I think it depends on exactly how intent they are on getting that enterprise market. If they're willing to take a portion of it, then they're going to be just fine with the Chrome interface, because let's face it, a lot of what corporations do today is in fact browser-faced. I talk to a lot of people who are using browser-faced applications. Even things like email, corporate email, not Google email, but corporate email, corporate scheduling has a web-facing version. The problem is that there are still applications that don't. And for those, you need something like a virtual desktop. If Google's serious about getting all of the enterprise market that it can get, then it will do something about making that VDI or virtual desktop interface available. If it's going to be primarily a consumer play, if in fact it's trying to steal from the Apple playbook, then I think they're going to be just fine where they are. The question that I have, though, is whether or not the Chromebook has that cool factor that the iPad did. There was something special about the iPad when it came back, and it grabbed the imagination. When you get right down to it, a Chromebook is a less expensive, smaller version of something that's already existed. It isn't really a new thing. Whether the price point and the size is going to be enough to put it in the hands of a lot of people, we just don't know. Although I do think we can get some hint of an answer from the way that things like the Kindle Fire have done versus the iPad. Pretty good sales, can't really argue with it, but they haven't knocked it off its pedestal. There's a lesson there for Google, I think.
I want to echo something that Lawn Dog in the chat room is saying, and that is with this new wave of Google Chromebooks, what we're seeing is the ability to do things offline. So even if you don't have that persistent connection, the reason why you've got such a large hard drive, a 320 gigabyte hard drive, is you can actually load the applications and data that you need onto your Chromebook, and then they'll sync up when you do have your connection again. I want to give the last word on this story to Dan and get back to the consumer angle. if we're looking at a $200 price point, and I'm going to you because you are an avowed Apple fanboy, you're an Apple fan, what would you prefer to get? For $200, would you get a Nexus 7 16-gigabyte tablet, which is running Android, or would you get a Google Chromebook running, well, Google apps?
I mean, I got to be honest. I mean, I haven't played with the Chromebook, but I mean, I think I know the idea of it. I'd get the Nexus. If I wanted a laptop, I'd have a laptop. I just don't, I guess as a completely non-techie type of consumer, you know, if I want a laptop, I want it to be able to be a full functioning, full-fledged laptop. And I can buy one for maybe $50 to $100 more than this Chromebook here. And so given the $200 price point, no, I'd rather get the Nexus 7 because to me, a tablet has a completely different use case for me anyways.
Yeah, well, good thing to know. Good. I mean, that gives us a really nice dichotomy of the enterprise side. We're really excited about the manageability of a device like this. On the consumer side, it might still be, I don't know what it's for. I have a laptop. I have a tablet. Where would I get a Chromebook? Now, the reason why we're talking about this story is not necessarily because we're all that impressed with Chromebooks. I mean, I love the fact that Acer's really pushing what we expect out of a low-priced device, a low-priced thin client. But the real reason we bring it up is because of a legal story. Now, a few weeks ago, we got the group together, and with William Shapiro, we talked about this decision down in South Carolina involving email. It was a divorce case, and essentially, on the wife's side, she had gotten copies of emails that proved that the husband was having an affair. Well, the husband sued, saying, you can't do that because my emails are protected under the Stored Communications Act of 1986. The Supreme Court of South Carolina came down and said, the SCA doesn't protect your data because you read the email and then you left it on the server. And if you left it on the server, it means you abandoned it. And if you abandoned it, it no longer is protected by the SCA. We chuckled a little bit because we thought, okay, this is a state case. It's going to get overturned. It's running directly up against the Ninth Circuit. So at some point, it's going to get challenged at the U.S. Supreme Court. But now we've got a brand new case involving Mega Upload and Kim.com. That's right. It seems that the United States government has one-upped South Carolina by arguing that data in the cloud does not belong to its users. Dan, you've done a little bit of study of this. Tell me about it. What's this case about? Why are we arguing? What's the federal government trying to do?
Yeah, thanks, Padre. US versus Kim.com. First of all, one of the most awesome case names ever, USA versus Kim.com. But in any event, it's a criminal case involving, you know, Kim.com, where they say that he's illegally sharing files or whatever. What you're talking about here is the government really versus a third party, by all accounts, completely innocent person by the name of Kyle Goodwin. Now, this poor sucker used Mega Upload to back up some of his files for his website, where he basically shot high school videos, and those videos were to be accessible to parents across the state of Ohio. And those were seized. That data was located on Carpathia servers that was being leased out by Mega Upload, which of course is being owned by Kim.com. So when the pre-indictment is kind of the scary time, because that's a completely secret type of thing where they're investigating and they don't really give you any kind of way to figure out what's going on with your stuff, even if you have really nothing to do with it. But in this case, Kim.com's already been indicted. And the U.S. government has actually already released, I put that in air quotes, I'm not sure if the cam saw that, but released the evidence to be done with, you know, as it will. And the evidence, I'm talking about the data on Carpathia servers. The problem is that Carpathia is unwilling to open up or light up their servers because of the fear of potential liability, again, from the U.S. government. And the U.S. government is not saying that they won't hold Carpathia liable if they do turn those things on. So now I have somewhat of a different take on how this is going. And by the way, Kyle Goodwin's data has been basically held hostage in this whole scenario. And again, he's totally innocent. Nobody thinks he's guilty of anything. And I don't quite have the sky is falling take on it as you, Padre. I read the government's brief on the scope, on what they feel should be the scope and the breadth of the 41G hearing. The 41G hearing is Kyle Goodwin's motion to have his data returned. Okay. And what the government brief says, and it is cause for concern, what it says is that the data that is uploaded to Mega Uploads, which is stored on Carpathia servers, may not belong to Kyle Goodwin. May not. It does not say anywhere in that brief that it does not belong. Perhaps a bit disingenuous. Disingenuously, it says that the data that he uploaded may be limited because of terms of service between Carpathia and Mega Upload, or between Kyle Goodwin and Mega Upload, number one. And in a footnote says that it may be further limited by the fact that as soundtracks for his videos, he might have included copyrighted music. And so
Dan, let me break in really quick here. I understand how the criminal case is progressing, and of course you're a criminal lawyer, so that's naturally where you would go. I think on the tech side, what I'm really concerned about, and what a lot of guys like me are concerned about, is that the federal government has basically argued that they did not seize data, they seized servers. And on those servers, you may have had thousands of different users. And actually in their filing, in the actual filing, they say that their defense for not getting warrants for going through each folder of data was that it would be ridiculous. It's unthinkable that they'd have to get warrants for every person on a server in order to search through it for evidence of criminal wrongdoing for Mega Upload. That scares someone like me, because if I have something in the cloud, most of the time, 99% of the time, I don't actually own the server on which that data resides. I'm either co-locating it or I'm buying a timeshare of a server that's been leased to me, which means that if someone else on my server does something illegal, the government can seize that server, look through all the data, including my data, and I have no recourse to either get it back or to say, hey, you can't look through my data. I want to get back to you first, but let me go to Brian. Brian, I mean, you are an evangelist for a company that's trying to get us into the cloud, that's trying to get us to use thin clients. If this stands, and if we expand this to its ultimate conclusion, which would be saying basically anything you put in the cloud is fair game to be looked at without a warrant, what does that do to cloud services?
Oh man, it's, from my point of view, it's totally, the sky is really falling. You know, we're looking at being able to kiss goodbye literally trillions of dollars in investments, and that's trillion with a T, all around the world, because then all the big cloud vendors are global in nature. So either that means the Europeans or someone else is going to say, no, that's wrong, and all the cloud services are going to move to Europe, or the Europeans are going to catch up and say, hey, we're going to do the exact same thing, and literally cloud computing goes away, and trillions of dollars in investments and decades of development just go poof. I would be out of a job, and I know an awful lot of people would. This would have an economic impact on the United States equivalent. It'd be worse than the Great Depression. I don't think there's any kind of precedence for what this would cause economically to the world.
Curtis, throw to you here. I'll come back to you, Dan, in just a second. But I mean, we look at services that are really popular, stuff like any email service. So Yahoo and Google and Microsoft and Dropbox or SkyDrive or Google Drive. Those all put data onto shared servers located around the world. What kind of effect would you have if you suddenly said, if you want to make your data secure, you have to own everything? You have to own the computers that you're using. You have to own the servers that exist in a colo. You have to be contracted to actually say ownership is mine. Is it as bad as Brian says? Is it the sky is falling on the cloud?
I would probably say, if not the sky is falling, that this, if it's upheld, would limit the international growth of public cloud computing services for the enterprise. I already talked to a lot of companies, especially based in Europe, who will not take advantage of any cloud services that are owned by or could be based in the U.S. Because of the differences in the way U.S. laws and European Union laws handle issues ranging from privacy to user data control to the ownership of data and services. Something like this, I think, goes a long way towards justifying their fears about that. Now, it's true that most of us, I've seen a couple of comments over in the chat room, I think facetiously, that said, well, if you're not a criminal, you don't have anything to worry about. The problem is, though, as we've seen now, even if you have completely clear records, even if you are scot-free of doing any wrongdoing, you can very easily be significantly inconvenienced. And if you have placed a serious bet on cloud services, even put out of business if you can't get to data or processing services. I think what we're going to see is more and more a case of companies going to European or Asian cloud services if they're using public cloud infrastructure, or taking advantage of private clouds where they know that the ownership of the cloud, the servers themselves, everything is outside of your U.S. jurisdiction. I'm concerned about this, but I don't think we've seen it nearly the last chapter written in this one.
Danny, let me go back to you because I know you've been chomping at the bit. I can hear you seething with intelligent comments to give us. Tell me why I shouldn't be panicking.
I'm not sure about the intelligent, but let me just try to talk you guys off the cliff here.
Okay.
First of all, the government again did not say that the data that they upload or that Kyle Goodwin uploaded to these servers was not his. What they did say is that he made an insufficient showing in his initial motion for return of property that it was his. And then they bring up these potential issues such as the TOS between Carpathia and Mega Upload and him, and the possibility that his ownership rights might have been tainted by the inclusion of copyrighted music on his videos. That's all. That very well could be just a red herring for a situation like this. And I've had this many times as a defense attorney, even as a prosecutor. Sometimes when you want to know how to go forward on a particular legal issue and you don't quite have the guidance from the courts that you would like, sometimes you go through the motions, even if they might not actually believe that this is the correct way to go, but at least to have legal guidance as to say, well, okay, in the future, this is how we're going to conduct our search warrants of servers, okay? And so I think that has part to do with it. Now, ordinarily, a party wouldn't want to do this type of curiosity and waiting for legal guidance type of thing because they don't have the money for attorney's fees. And the more that the U.S. Continues and that they don't settle with Mr. Goodwin to return his data, the more potential attorney's fees that Mr. Goodwin is getting and the more potential attorney fee award that he can get if he wins. And hopefully he does win. But the U.S. can afford that. And what the U.S. perhaps wants is a judge, even if it's a district court judge right now, and maybe it goes up to a circuit court level, for some type of an appellate opinion or a judicial opinion, so that they know they have greater certainty as to how to proceed. But I think getting to Brian's point, they did not say that uploaded data did not belong to him. I agree that if that's what they were saying as a per se rule, then we all have to be very careful. But I don't think that that's what they said, first of all. Secondly, I didn't get a chance to look at Mega Upload's terms of service, but I did, get a brief look at, for example, Dropbox. Dropbox specifically says that you still own your property. They have the right to modify it, or they have the license to modify it in order to improve their service. But as far as the IP, it still belongs to you. Microsoft SkyDrive has the same type of language. The IP belongs to you. The data belongs to you. But they can modify it, and I'll allow you, the people in the tech world, to to be able to explain what that means in order to improve their service.
But Dan, hold up a sec. I get that, and yeah, I mean, from a criminal law perspective, I understand what you're saying, but from the geek perspective, from the networking administrator perspective, this is what I keep coming back to, and that is the government looked through his data, and they looked through the data of everybody else that was on that server, looking for evidence against Mega Upload. The fact that they looked at the data at all, that's what kills the cloud. It's not necessarily the legal proceeding. It's if I'm running an enterprise and I think that my data might be looked at by anybody, and I don't care if someone's going to use it to prosecute me, but if they get to peek at my financials, if they get to peek at my media, if they get to peek at my pictures, I'm not going to put it in the cloud. And I mean, we know the government looked through the servers, and there's not much of a recourse for the defendant. I mean, for the plaintiff, right?
Well, I mean, first of all, they could be entitled to attorney's fees and whatever equitable relief they might get upon his return of the property. And so hopefully what happens is, in this case, the district court smacks down the U.S. and gives them the disincentive, the financial, if nothing else, to stop misbehaving like this. But I guess where the disconnect is, and that's probably because I'm a criminal attorney, and that is that the government does this all the time. A police officer will he'll look into your windows in your house and see if something strange is going on. He might do some other relatively unsavory things. It happens. I mean, I see it. I'm not saying it's a rule, but it does happen. As far as data served on or placed into the internet, I've always been taught, and I'm a loyal podcast listener. I listen to the Twit Network shows all the time. They always say anything you put on the internet the government's looking at it. And so I guess it's not too shocking to me to believe that, yes, wow, they're looking at the data, because I figured that they're looking at it anyways. Now, whether they can actually use that against you is of course where people like myself, criminal defense attorneys, come in. Yep. But I don't know if it's necessarily a way to stop them from doing that.
Let me throw it to Cheebert here, because Cheebert, actually, Dan's bringing up a really good point, and that is legally, this case may not be as interesting as it is technologically, because legally, what Dan says is absolutely on. I mean, the police have had this power to look at suspicious things, but I think we've sort of built up cloud services with this idea of, well, yeah, it's joined with other people's data, but it's mine. It's always mine. It's just like a little piece of my property is out in the world, and it's always going to be protected. Even if there is no legal precedent here, what kind of chilling effect do we get from having a case in which the government has acknowledged that they've looked through data that people thought they had secured on the cloud?
Well, the immediate effect is HIPAA in the cloud, gone immediately. Because even if you can look at it, even under the guise of a court, even if they had a court order, because you can look at it, you've got problems right there. FERPA has the same problem. I'm actually thinking what I need to do is I need to start drafting some letters, put it someplace so that the Twit Army can go and download it, put their name on it, and start bombarding their congressional delegations and say, hey, we need something along the lines of a digital embassy bill, so that just because it's in the cloud, if you are renting it or leasing it or whatever, that it is yours. And if someone fights us back, maybe one of the things we might want to do is maybe the agreements with the cloud services might need to change to something along the lines of maybe like a timeshare where you own part of it. And that way we don't have problems with this illegal search and seizure. I'm going to play Chicken Little on this just because I've seen so many abuses of things by our government. Our government, they're trustworthy to a point, but we got to make sure that there's rules to protect our rights. And it's in our best interest to not be silent on this. It's time to start writing our congressional delegations.
Okay. Quick one to Curtis. I like what Chiebert's saying about like HIPAA and FERPA and documents and information that we think are privileged. If we're putting them on the web, do we automatically violate something like the Healthcare Information Portability Act, where we're putting it into a medium where we know it's going to be looked at.
I was going to say that there are a lot of people I talk to in the healthcare industry who will not consider using cloud services or cloud storage for precisely this reason. They cannot be assured of absolute confidentiality and security of every link along the way. I think for a lot of people in the enterprise, though, the issue ultimately doesn't come down to could law enforcement look at it. That's something that many people accept. It becomes a could I lose access to it? And that's why I think that one of the things that comes out of this is the critical nature of using multiple backup sources if you're going to have anything either in the cloud or in local servers. Now, there are different reasons behind it, but you need to have redundant backup so that if something happens to deny you access to your primary data and servers, whether it's going to be natural disaster or legal action against your provider, you are not shut down as a business. To me, that may be the single most critical lesson to come out of this.
Dan, I want to give you the last word here because you've done a really good job of talking us off the cliff. And I understand the legal ramifications, why it may not seem like such a big thing because this is happening all the time. But what advice would you give to someone, to an enterprise, to a small business who is putting data into the cloud? What would you tell them about the security of their information and security of the services that they might put on someone else's server?
Okay, I mean, first of all, while I might not think it's as huge of a deal, perhaps as Brian and you think, I still think it's a big deal. And I think the government in this US versus Kim.com case hopefully will get spanked by the judge with a bunch of attorney's fees and, you know, some very strong wording that they can't do this. Obviously, the net that they cast for this case was far too large, so as to include, for example, people like Kyle Goodwin, who nobody thinks did anything wrong. And so why is he without access to his data for all this time? Which, by the way, brings up an interesting point as to what the EFF wrote in their motion in support of Kyle Goodwin. And they mentioned, getting back to Curtis's point, that he had a backup hard drive of all his data. And for some reason it crashed. So a couple of weeks later, he tried to get it off of Mega Upload, and by that point, Mega Upload servers had already been seized. So redundancy in his case of not having it in just one hard drive and one online site would have certainly helped him, and perhaps would have avoided the situation that he's in now. But insofar as what I would tell people, you know, as harsh as it sounds, and I guess unless. Well, I don't even know what the answer would be, because even if they passed a federal law and the law is passed in 50 states saying the government cannot look at your cloud data, not without probable cause, not without a warrant, that's not going to stop the government from potentially looking in there anyways. And so insofar as do I trust the government? No, absolutely not. You gotta maintain high vigilance when dealing with them. And so the problem, I think, I see it as Curtis sees it, and it's not so much that people are going to look at your data, is are you going to be able to access it? Are you going to be able, or are you going to lose your data? And I think what the Kyle Goodwins of the world should teach everybody is that one online and one hard drive is not enough. Put it on 2 hard drives, put it on 3, put it in 4 or 5 different places, put it in 2 or 3 different online services. You know, redundancy is a good thing. The more redundant, the better, the less likely that you're going to lose access to your data.
Well, Dan, thank you very much. We really expired all the time we have available for this topic, but that's not the end of the topic. Can I ask you to come back online, maybe with another lawyer with another viewpoint, when this case inevitably gets much bigger, because we're not done talking about this.
Oh, that'll be great. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. Love it.
Now, before you go, is there anything that you would like our audience to know about you, about Phoenix Law, about your love for Mac?
Yeah, I am an unfortunate Apple user. iMacs, MacBook Airs, iPads, iPhones, and whatnot. And that's probably because I don't know too much about tech. So I guess I gravitate towards Apple. I'm an attorney. I do immigration and criminal defense. I guess that's my website. But on this day, I'd just like to honor the veterans, say thank you. It's one of the reasons why I can do what I do, how we can all do what we do, and it's one of the reasons why I could be in a baseball cap and a sports jersey on a Monday, because all the courts are closed today. So thank you to the veterans.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you very much for your time and for a fantastic discussion. And hopefully we'll see you soon.
Now, thank you.
Take care. When we built our studio, we decided we wanted to do things a little bit differently. Ironically, we wanted to put everything in the cloud because we believed in the promise of the cloud. We didn't want a big PBX server in the basement. We didn't want to have to worry about getting equipment and maintenance and a contract and allowing people to come into our building to service our phones. We wanted something that was quick and easy. And that's why we went with RingCentral. You see, when we were building the studio, our IT geek, Russell, came to us and told us about RingCentral. It had 0 startup costs. There was no PBX hardware to install or maintain. RingCentral also allows us to easily customize all of our call handling. Our producers get their voicemail in their email, and we can even get our fax messages right off of our smartphones. Now, this is what I would love for you to do. I would love you to try out RingCentral just to see if it will suit the needs of your small to medium business. They've got all-inclusive pricing, starting as low as $20 per month per user. You can start right now with a 30-day risk-free trial, and they have a special offer for my listeners. When you buy 1 desk phone, you get a second one free, up to 20 phones. So call this number designated for my listeners, 800-543-9980. That's 800-543-9980. Again, 800-543-9980. Or you can go to ringcentral.com and use promo code TWIT. That's RingCentral promo code TWIT. And we thank RingCentral for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. We've brought in a brand new guest for this segment because, well, we want to bring in years of experience when we start talking about independent testing. Mr. Oliver Rist from InfoWorld, are you online?
I am online.
Welcome back. You've been a frequent guest to the show. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now and where you be?
I am up in Kirkland, Washington, and I'm testing away for InfoWorld, and I hope to have a fun time talking about that today.
Speaking about testing away, that is the topic that we want to cover. It's been a long time coming. It's something that's near and dear to our heart, and we wanted to talk about this subject for a while because a lot of people don't necessarily understand the importance of independent testing. Cheever, let me throw it to you. What would you say is independent testing? What makes it different from something we might get just out in the on the web?
I actually think I think the best example is Consumer Reports. You know, the Consumer Reports is built up an amazing amount of trust because they are independent. They do not have any advertising, whatever, and so forth. Well, InfoWorld Magazine has been doing this type of testing for a very, very long time. And while they can't afford to not take advertising like Consumer Reports does, we've had a separation of church and state that's been longstanding for as long as I've been working with them. And as a reviewer, we're actually not allowed to know what ads are up for sale, so that ad sales can in no way, shape, or form affect the outcome of reviews. One of the things that a lot of people keep forgetting is that a lot of the magazines out there now the reviews are actually written by the vendors themselves. So they're always going to look as good as humanly possible. So one of the things that Oliver and I have done over the years when we've done some of these really big tests is we go and take their glossies, their brag sheets, and we go and say, well, you're bragging about it. Let's go test it. And over the years, we've had a lot of fun, including setting a switch on fire.
Curtis, over to you. You've done plenty of testing on your own. What would you say is special about an independent testing, and why isn't everything independently tested?
Well, the thing that's special about independent testing is that you can have testing that's designed to see what a product will actually do rather than being designed to show off some aspect of the product. I think anyone who's been involved in creating benchmark tests or tests of any sort knows that it's possible to construct a test to show anything you want. I mean, if I want to have a test that shows that my HP calculator is better than an HP server, I can do that. I just have to shape the test properly. But what independent testing can do is show the actual full capabilities of a product in a particular direction without having an axe to grind. Now, why isn't it done more often? It's a simple single word answer: money. Doing tests properly is expensive. It requires expertise, it requires infrastructure, and it requires time. All of those are expensive, and a lot of companies just aren't willing to pay for it. That's especially true when it comes to publications. It's funny, I found when I was going through some material this last week, the paper copy of my very first published review in Byte magazine. It was the IBM PS2 Model 80. And remembering what we did back then, we took a lot of pains to make sure that everything was done right. There were a lot of other magazines that did the same thing. There are very few magazines that do that today. InfoWorld is one of them. But even they have had difficulty maintaining that business model, and they're able to do it much less than they did before because of the money. Is it worthwhile? Yes. But it certainly is an expensive way to get really good answers.
Let me take that, because it sounds like almost horrible when it comes down to money. But I want to ask our last panelist, who is also our resident optimist, Mr. John C. Dvorak. I mean Oliver Rist. What do you think about that?
Please don't compare me to Dvorak. That's not fair.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll add something to Curtis's statement. Yes, I think testing is critical. What makes our particular brand, meaning Curtis, Brian, and myself, so expensive versus what a lot of other magazines do, like say PC Magazine, is that we're testing enterprise hardware. So if you're working for PC Magazine and you're testing an MP3 player or a new PC, you don't have a lot of testing equipment that's necessary. You have some benchmarks and you have a bench to put the thing on and turn it on, and that's about it. The kind of testing that we've actually pioneered at InfoWorld is the scenario test. So we don't just do a bunch of benchmark tests on, say, a switch, which used to be the popular method, 10, 15 years ago with that guy, Scott Bradley or something, whose name I'm going to forget, who would just run massive amounts of numbers through the latest crop of switches, and it'll be up to you to interpret what those numbers meant. We do something where we decide, okay, with this particular enterprise product, how is that going to be used in a data center? What do business people who buy it actually want out of it? Then we set up a scenario, literally like an RFP, and we ask the vendor, hey, we're going to take your product. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. You have to come in, set it up. You have to do it just as if we were a customer, and then we're going to try all these scenarios, and we're going to let you know how you did. That is a very expensive proposition because we literally have to invent or simulate a data center, as well as users, as well as a server infrastructure for some of this stuff. And that's something, a lot of magazines and heck, just a lot of independent testing labs just don't have the money or the bandwidth for. So keeping that alive, I think, is critical, because if you're spending $100,000, $200, $1 million on some new equipment, it's nice to have someone who doesn't have, as Brian says, an axe to grind, go through this and tell you if what you're reading in the advertisement is actually true.
I love that. I mean, the point that you bring out that I think is really important is that doing an independent test is actually really, really hard. It's not just plugging the box in and looking at a screen for a while to see if it's working. You actually have to expose it to real-world threats, real-world environments, and see how it reacts. And yeah, there are very few labs that are set up to do that. In fact, one of the only labs set up to do that in the world, and which does independent testing, is run by one of our panelists, Brian Chi. Brian, talk a little bit about what Oliver brought out about setting up these real-world tests and using a methodology where you basically tell the vendors, I want your gear, but other than that, stay out of my way.
Well, it's actually a lot more complicated than that. One of the things that we that we pioneered, actually Oliver and I pioneered, is the concept of we'll go and ask every single vendor that we're planning on asking into this test, if you were to design this test, how would you do it? And we'll go and compare all the responses and take the commonalities, and that becomes the expected. If you can't do the expected, you're penalized and your score goes negative. If you can, then you're a 0. But it still gives the vendors the opportunity to go in and say, hey, I've got all these extra special features, give me some points. And that's how you gain the points in the system. Independent testing is a bear to do. I actually maintain relationships with a very large number of both small, medium, and large corporations, and they actually give me their network statistics. From that, I go and create what-if scenarios. What if your corporation that has 100 branch offices and it's all feeding back and they all need VPNs? My VPN story was one of the most popular, and there's some people actually starting to think about turning that into a standard. Really cool stuff, but insanely expensive to do because it took an awful lot of time. My lab has about $16 million worth of test equipment in it just to do this kind of scenario testing. And unfortunately, it is an unusual lab. There's a few others, University of New Hampshire and Wisconsin have them. But running a big test where you're really testing how well does it work, maybe doing RFC testing, that's about a $50,000 test. So when you start talking about, these kind of numbers, it's no wonder that a lot of corporations have decided, well, maybe we'll just trust the salesman. And we all know how well that works.
Curtis, what about this? I mean, that's a lot of money. Who's going to pay for an independent test? I understand that the magazines try to keep the sales side aside from the journalistic side. We try to do that in all news media. But with that kind of money being expended, doesn't sound like it's an attractive thing to do.
Well, it becomes an attractive thing to do only under two circumstances. One, and this was the traditional magazine model, when you could spread that cost out over all of your advertisers. Then you could make it work. As the number of advertisers went down, especially on print publications, it became harder and harder to justify, and we see what's happened. The other thing is if you are an enterprise that is getting ready to make a massive investment, an example would be a company that's getting ready to launch a new ERP system. If you want to make sure that that ERP system can stand up under your load of anticipated simultaneous users. Now, this is something that I used to do about 15 years ago. We spent time putting together tests for SAP, doing benchmark tests of those and of other big enterprise systems. And those are also hellaciously expensive. Brian mentioned the $16 million worth of testing gear in his lab. I can tell you that when you're putting together a lab, running past $1 million in equipment takes the blink of an eye. And what I became very good at doing was short-term leases on very expensive hardware. I remember doing tests for large oil companies where I literally had tractor trailers full of equipment being brought in to do the load on their system. And believe me, when you are leasing 20 small mainframes at a time, the cost runs up, as do the licenses for the software that you need to simulate, let's call it 20,000 simultaneous users. The only way to justify that is if the cost of an error exceeds the cost of the test. And there really are only so many times that that's going to happen. This is the sort of information that is exceptionally valuable. It's exceptionally important, but the cost is such that unless it can be spread out over a large user base, it's almost impossibly prohibitive for any one company to bear.
All right, I want to bring up a subject that hopefully will be a bit cathartic for you three old salts, and that is, give me an example, and change the name so we don't get sued or anything, but give me an example of when testing went horribly wrong because it wasn't independent. Who wants to jump in here first?
This is Kurt. I can jump in on that one. Again, this is one that I got called in to consult on. A very large, very well-known government agency was getting ready to install a new computer system. And I will say that this was a computer system that would have had an impact on the life of every working American, not to name any three-letter names. They decided that they were going to do a completely new system. They called me and said they wanted to verify the performance. My team spent about a month designing tests. When it came back, they said that no, what they really wanted to do was just rerun the benchmarks that the hardware vendors had run and had given them. We explained to them why those benchmarks were meaningless to them, primarily because they had been run on a configuration of the system that no human being, no agency, no company would ever buy. They listened to us, thanked us, went off and did it anyway. About 6 months later, news came that they were scrapping the entire effort because, oddly enough, the system would not do what they thought it would do. The amount of money that was flushed on that, somewhere north of $100 million.
I don't know if anyone can top that. Oliver, what do you got? I mean, when testing isn't independent and when you've got, say, the advertising side driving it, or when you've got the agency buying the product driving the testing, what bad things happen?
Well, I'll back up Brian and Curtis here a little bit with one additional audience. Generally, I think the guys that they're talking about are is the engineering side. For the magazine side, those guys are called in by the marketing department. These tests are incredibly valuable to the marketing staff because they validate this product, they validate their sales pitch if they win. So if the marketing staff has a lot of confidence in their product, which does happen, they will participate in these comparative tests. Now, on the internal side, yes, I have a story similar to Curtis's. A friend of mine recently had to design a test for a large software company that shall remain nameless, for a communications product that also shall remain nameless, where the engineers under the direction of marketing decided to do a performance test from Australia all the way to New York, and they forgot that they have the internet in the way. So my buddy had to explain to them that the performance numbers were going to be very, very low because they can't control anything between Australia and the U.S. So similar to Curtis, they said, thank you. He talked himself out of a job, and they went and did the test anyway. And subsequently, they lost a giant account for mysterious reasons, because I believe the giant account decided to do its own test based on the marketing pitch, which was, hey, this is a global comm system. So yeah, real testing is very expensive, and also the smarts to do it is those are also rare.
Oh, we're going to get right back to talking about independent testing, but first I wanted to stop and thank one of our sponsors. That's Lantronix. We all have our iOS devices. I mean, even if you're an Android person, you know there are a lot of iOS devices. It works really well. They're fantastically designed. But there has been one big problem, and that is, what do you do when you have to print? And yes, even in this age, sometimes you have to print. Now, you could kludge a solution. I've seen people who attach documents to emails that they send to a desktop that then prints it out, or copy and paste into a text file that's saved on a USB dongle. But that's not really convenient. I mean, what we want to be able to do with our iOS devices, with our iPhones and our iPads and our iPod touches, is just to hit print like we do on every device on the planet. Well, now you can, thanks to this. This is the Lantronix Xprint server. Now, what it does is nothing short of magic. It allows you to plug it into your network, into your existing network, and from this one box, without connecting any printers to it, it will set up all the protocols that your iDevice needs to be able to print to your office printer, to the printers connected to your computers, to USB printers that are hooked up to laptops and desktops. It's really that simple. Now, when we started looking at the Xprint server, we were a little skeptical because we've heard claims of being able to print from iOS devices before, and they've always fallen a little short. Not so with the Xprint server from Lantronix. It supports more than 4,000 of the most popular printers on the market. Also, setup is fantastically easy. You just plug it into your network, and the Xprint server automatically discovers the available printers and makes them usable by your iOS device. For the more advanced, the Xprint server also includes a configuration screen so that you can customize your Xprint server to work on the settings you have in your network. Now, a single Xprint server supports multiple printers and virtually unlimited iOS devices. The Home Edition is $99 and supports up to 8 USB printers and 2 network printers. The Network Edition is $149 and supports an unlimited number of network printers. It will even work on multifunction printers, you know, those fax and copy and print type devices. So here's what I want you to do. If you have an iOS device, if you have an iPad or an iPhone or an iPod Touch, go to xprintserver.com/twit for more information and to buy. And we've got a special offer. Use the coupon code TWIT to receive free shipping on your order. Remember, visit xprintserver.com and at checkout, enter the coupon code TWIT. We thank Lantronix for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Let's get back to it. Cheebert, when we think about independent testing, give us an idea of, well, what do you need to make it happen? What are the qualities that we want to look for when we actually read independent tests of gear that we will need for our enterprise?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a firm believer that when you start doing testing, not only does the test plan have to be published, it also has to be open. Scripts have to be available. Any kind of good scientific methodology means that your tests must be repeatable. If it can only be run once and nobody else can run it, it's worthless. So all the tests that I run, the scripts are available, the test plans are available. The only thing we won't make public is the raw numbers. So the raw numbers only go to the corporations, but the summary numbers are what we actually publish. The ability to have these numbers actually has changed the industry quite a bit. We've actually had several corporations that have changed their product lines because of some independent testing, especially since some of these guys have never, ever run their equipment all the way at the limits. We actually had this one test when Gigabit Ethernet was brand new and FDDI was still king. It was a transition switch that went between FDDI and Gigabit Ethernet. We actually ramped that sucker up and we heard this thing like popcorn. What's going on? And then all of a sudden, magic blue smoke started coming out of the switch and the lights went off. So we pulled it open and every single interface chip on that board had a crater in it. The testing had actually ramped it up and blown up all the chips in the switch. It was spectacular. We've even actually had a ATM router that we literally set on fire. So these corporations don't think that people might actually do this. Every single time we've run a really big test, we've actually uncovered major bugs in the software. This is something very, very good for the consumer, and we keep these vendors honest about it.
That's actually good. And I want to throw this over to Curtis. There's a comment that's kind of snippy in the chat room, but it does bear some talk. Who independently tests the independent testers? I think a better way of asking this is, what should I be looking for when I'm actually considering an independent test? What are the things that tell me that this was a good independent test? Cheebert mentioned that you have to make sure that your methodology is open, that your scripts are open. But to break it down even further, where do you start when you want to actually look at independent tests of gear that you're going to deploy in your network?
I think that there are a couple of things that are easy to say, and then there are a couple that are meaningful. The easy thing is that you look at the reputation of the tester, but as we all know, reputations are easy to build and easy to destroy. So rather than depending on the reputation, you want to look at two things. Number one is the construction of the test, and this is where the issues that Brian brought up are so important. Take a look and make sure that the test is measuring things that are meaningful. To the extent that you can look at a test parameter and say, yeah, I see how that applies to me in my situation, then that test is meaningful to you. If you look at the test and go, it creates a really fancy number, but I don't know what it means, then that's the indication that it's something that you should take with a huge grain of salt. The other thing to look at is the configuration of the device being tested. This becomes more and more important as the scale of the devices goes up. I mean, it's one thing to say that we're testing a laptop computer. That's fairly knowable. But when you start looking at servers, when you start to look at core switches, when you start to look at enterprise equipment, make sure that the device that's being tested is something that you can actually buy and would actually buy, because it's very easy to do the testing equivalent of performing a benchmark on the NASCAR version of the family sedan. You want to make sure that's not happening. So the two things you look at, the test that's being run and the configuration of the device being tested. If both of those seem like they apply to your situation, then the odds are good that you're going to have numbers that are meaningful to you.
Over to you, Oliver. When you consider independent testing, and if you've got a person, a network admin coming up to you and saying, look, there are so many different benchmarks, there are so many different websites screaming different things about a particular product, how would you tell him what to look for? How would you tell him where to start? How would you tell him who to trust?
I'm a little higher level than my other two guys. It's for me, be less about the numbers and more about the testing house. And one, unfortunately, easy criteria is there just aren't that many left. So you have a very limited number of choices. And then look at how they do business. So there were several testing labs before a lot of them died that did great tests, or at least that they seemed to. However, they asked for cash subsidies from everybody being tested. That naturally puts into question, if I give more money to your test, am I going to get better treatment? And the answer for this particular lab was yes. And we can't mention any names, but look for a lab that specifically does completely independent, no cost to the vendor type testing. That's what I would look for. And yes, then look for expertise. Look to make sure someone's helping Brian, because he's not really all that smart. And then you have a successful test.
Okay, I'm going to give the last word to Brian for that one. So who needs to be helping you when you're not that smart? No, seriously. The question. Let's wrap this up and say, what should people think about independent testing? When they start looking at your white papers, when they look at your methodologies, when they look at all the different ways that you've run a particular piece of gear that parallel what's happening in the real world, what are you hoping that they'll glean from the stats and the specs that you post on your reviews?
It's actually pretty simple. How well does it match how you do your thing? Oliver and I and Wayne Rash literally founded this whole independent testing thing back in, I think it was 95, 92, somewhere in that range.
95.
We started, thank you, Oliver. And it just went crazy. We actually started an arms race with a couple of different magazines to do this. But the thing that I think, never really lost sight of is trying to make sure that the scenarios fit the real world. I actually collected real world statistics from different corporations. That's what I created my scripts on. InfoWorld's been doing this for a long, long time, and we literally created the industry. And the unfortunate thing is the advertisers haven't been voting with their dollars. So now we only get to do maybe one every other year of a large scale test, and all the rest of the tests are teeny tiny. It's kind of sad, but yeah, look at the test, look at how well it matches how you do your thing. And that's probably what you need to take as the most important thing from this conversation.
So the bottom line is support your local tester. I like it. Before we go, I do want to thank our last sponsor, and that is SAP. That's right. Social media solutions from SAP is, well, what's going to drive business into the next generation. If you've been alive at all in the last decade, you know that social media has taken over. It's taken control. It's how we know what brands are in, what brands are hot, what products are good, and what products are not. Now, if you are managing the social media presence for a small to medium to large enterprise, you understand how difficult it can be to stay on top of your company's social media presence. It's about what one blogger is saying about your product, or what someone put on their Facebook page about a service, or what someone tweeted about the way that you responded to their customer service request. It's common for people to comment or complain about brands in public. And if you do work in social media, you need something like Social Media Solutions from SAP to help you engage and listen in a systematic way. Now, it does it in two ways. There's two modules to the service. The first is the listening component. It scours the social web in a smart way to know what is being said about your brand. It captures and reports on conversations about relevant terms, about passions, patterns, and even your competitors. It surfaces sentiment or the intensity of it. For example, do your customers like, love, or dislike something? It helps you build better products by incorporating real-time customer feedback into your efforts. It also helps you to identify customers who are ready to buy. It looks at their buying signals, the messages they put on social media, and it uses natural language processing, or NLP, to intelligently and automatically know the difference between similar statements such as, this app has never been good, or this app has never been this good. Believe it or not, that's actually really difficult for a system to be able to engage. The engaging component is the second part of SAP's social media solution. It helps you improve customer support by allowing you to set rules about which messages route to whom and how they should be dealt with. For example, if someone tweets a technical support project problem, you can get it to the right person and have them fix it through social media. Social Media Solutions from SAP gives you an accurate and real-time understanding of your brand's social media performance. Now, if you manage the social media presence for a large regional or national enterprise, get in touch with SAP. You can find out more at sap.com/twit. And we thank SAP for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm afraid that's all the time we have. This has been an absolutely packed episode. Everything from the future of the cloud to who should we trust when we're testing. I want to give our guests a last chance to shout out any projects they may be involved with. Brian, let's start with you. What's going on? I mean, I know you're on vacation right now, but do you have any projects that our listeners should know about?
Well, I think it's time for Don Quixote to start tilting at windmills. I've introduced bills in the past at the state level. I'm thinking I need to go and write to my congressional delegation and see if I can help them along on doing a digital embassy bill to help protect data in the cloud.
So we've got Don Quixote on camera one. Camera two, Curtis, what do you have going on with enterprise efficiency?
A lot of things, but we're coming down towards the end of the year, and one of the projects that I'm going to be working on is our end of the year gadget wrap up for executives. So I'd like to ask the Twiat audience, if there's a particular gadget, something that helps you do your job better, whether it's for traveling, sitting at your desk, communicating, whatever, please let me know about it. Drop an email to franklin@enterpriseefficiency.com, or if it's a short, sweet thing, just hit me on Twitter, KG4GWA.
That's a challenge if I've ever heard one. Twiat Group and the chat room. You need to get on it. Tell him what gadgets make your life easier. And on to, a guest that I particularly love, Oliver. What's going on with you? What do you want people to know about?
Why is it always me? Well, first, I have a very big assignment from InfoWorld, which is to double check all of Brian's work for the last year. So that's going to take me some time. But aside from that, everything Windows Server, except the actual Windows Server, is what's on my plate right now. So Windows Server Essentials, and then Office 365. So I'm basically putting together a small business package based on the new Microsoft releases to see how well that works. And in keeping with what we've just talked about, basically I'm at the point where I'm putting together an RFP, a list of things that a small business might want. So again, if your audience wants to give me some ideas, you can send an email to OLRIS as in Sam, T as in Tom @live.com, and we'll see if we can work it in.
Thanks to all members of my panel. You guys are absolutely fantastic. And thanks to Dan Balliser for dropping in for the legal side. Now, if you're listening in the car, do you know that we actually have several different versions of this podcast? That's right. We do different resolutions, so you can watch on your computer, on your iPod Touch, at home, on your big screen. You can download every version of Twiat that you need. But also, that subscription feed will allow you to automatically send every week's episode of Twiat to your iPhone or your iPod or your Android device. Please subscribe. It's the way that we get out to you, and it's just makes us feel better knowing that we're reaching our audience. Also, did you know that we broadcast live? That's right. Twit is all about the live. And if you go to live.twit.tv Mondays at noon Pacific from, that's supposed to be noon Pacific. That's 3 o'clock Eastern. You can watch us live. And if you log into our chat room at irc.twit.tv, you'll be able to interact with the show. You'll see that I often pull questions out of the chat room because, well, I love you. Because it's not just a chat room. It's a temporary community. Also, please, please, please submit your stories and your questions for Twyat's first question and answer show by going to twyat.reddit.com. There you'll be able to submit your story, submit your question, vote questions up and down, and then we are going to answer it on Twyat. That's right. We'll take your questions, our panels, our answers, and just do it up. Also, please follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. You'll be able to find out what we're doing in each episode, suggest topics for future episodes, and just, well, find out what's going on in the life of the digital Jesuit. Also, next week, we're going to be having our big data guru, Andrew Brust. And we've got a brand new Stuff My IT Guy Says. So you better tune in because, well, if you don't, I'm going to find you. Now, remember, I'm Father Robert. This is Twyat. And if you want to know what's going on in the Enterprise, just keep Twyat.